Hello, and welcome back to the School of Byzantine Music's Foundations of Hymnology podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Father Panagiotis Steele, one of the instructors of the School of Byzantine Music. The last episode that I hosted was an introduction and a comparison of various different types of Orthodox execution of hymnology, namely the basic divisions between what we call psaltiki, the Byzantine ecclesiastical art, and the Slavic style. And the focus of our comparison was based on this quote by St. Basil the Great from his exegetical homily 10 on Psalm 1, which is the prologue to his homilies on the Psalms, in which, in an abbreviated version of the more lengthy quote I offered last time, we hear, "The delight of melody he mingled with the doctrines, so that by the pleasantness and softness of the sound heard, we might receive without perceiving it the benefit of the words, just as wise physicians who, when giving the fastidious rather bitter drugs to drink, frequently smear the cup with honey." So all of the last episode that I hosted, which was episode 7, 2 episodes ago, was about the honey. And I thought that we would delve deeper into what St. Basil terms, in a broad sense, the bitterness of the drugs that we drink for our salvation, the doctrines of the Church as expressed in the hymnology of the Church. How do these doctrines get mingled with the music? Well, the great hymnographers of the Church were not just men of holy life. Obviously, in order to be a saint, one is not necessarily learned or an expert in one particular thing or another, but one devotes their whole life to Christ our God, as we say in the Divine Liturgy. But they were very learned men and women. Cassia the hymnographer was one of the more prolific composers of hymnography, so we can't exclude women from this discussion. But yes, the ones of our saints who composed hymnography for the worship life of the Church were very well read, and the basis for an extraordinary number of our hymns are the other writings of the Holy Fathers, especially the writings of St. Gregory the theologian, and also some other homilies of the Fathers, and even the canons of the ecumenical councils. So we'll start with one of the pieces that we heard a comparison of musical styles last time, the Doxastikon of Pascha. We won't replay a clip, but we will read the text both in Greek and in English, and then do a comparison to St. Gregory the Theologian's first oration. It was the first oration that he gave, and it is on Pascha. So our hymnography, the original Greek hymnography of the Doxastikon of Pascha, is Αναστάσεως ημέρα και λαμπρινθόμεν τη πανηγύρι και αλλήλους περιπτυξόμεθα. Είπομεν αδελφοί και της μισούς συν ημάς, συγχωρήσομεν πάντα τη Αναστάση και ούτω βοήσομεν Χριστός ανέστη εκ νεκρών, θανάτου θάνατο πατήσας και της εν της μνήμαση ζωήν χαρισάμενος. Compare this to the opening of St. Gregory the Theologian's first oration. Αναστάσεως ημέρα και η αρχή δεξιά και λαμπρινθόμεν τη πανηγύρι και αλλήλους περιπτυξόμεθα. Είπομεν αδελφοί και της μισούς συν ημάς, μη ότι της διαγάπην τι πεποιηκώσιν ή πεπονθώσει, συγχωρήσομεν πάντα τη Αναστάση. And for those who may not be fluent in Greek, we can do the same thing in English. It is the day of resurrection. Let us be radiant for the festival, and let us embrace one another. Let us say, O brethren, even to those that hate us, let us forgive all things in the resurrection. And thus let us cry, Christ is risen from the dead. By death he has trampled down death, and upon those in the tombs he has bestowed life. Compare once again to the beginning of Gregory's Paschal oration, the first oration, and the first of his Paschal orations. It is the day of the resurrection, and my beginning has good auspices. Let us keep the festival radiantly, and let us embrace one another. Let us say, brethren, even to those who hate us, much more to those who have done or suffered anything out of love for us, let us forgive all offenses for the resurrection's sake. If we continue to compare the hymnography of Pascha to Gregory's first Paschal oration and the other orations he had on the great feast of Pascha, we see that even the canon, which starts off very similarly, Anastasios imera ke lambrinthomon lai, it is the resurrection day, O peoples, let us brilliantly shine, is also inspired by this first paragraph. There are parts of the Paschal Stichira that are inspired by subsequent paragraphs. And so we see that the explanation of the Holy Father of what the Feast of Pascha means is encoded into the liturgical life of the Church, enshrined in the very pinnacle of where Christian education and Christian worship meet, where the heart and the mind are unified in a mystical connection. Our next example is the canon of the Holy Nativity. This one is by Saint Cosmas the hymnographer, and as we have been chanting now for a few weeks, the first part of this canon goes, Χριστός γεννάται δοξάσατε, Χριστός εξ ουρανών απαντήσατε, Χριστός επί γης υψώθητε, άσατε το Κυρίο πάσα η γη και εν ευφροσύνη ανυμνήσομεν λαοί ότι δε δόξαστε. And in English, Christ is born, glorify him. Christ is come from heaven, go and meet him. Christ is on earth, arise to him. Sing to the Lord, all you who dwell on the earth, and in merry spirits, O you peoples, praise his birth, for he is glorified. The very first part, maybe the first half of this first troparion of the canon of Christmas, also used as the katavasia of the first ode, is verbatim from the first sentence of St. Gregory the Theologian's 38th oration on the Feast of Theophany. At the time of St. Gregory, these two feasts had just started to kind of separate into their forms that we know them today. For hundreds of years, they had been celebrated as one feast, the feast of both the Incarnation and, most importantly, the Theophany, the revealing of God in the flesh, and the establishment of the worship of the Trinity, as is celebrated on January 6th, the feast of the baptism. Those feasts were celebrated together in the early church. And so this oration treats both of these feasts in a manner such that they are together. The second canon of Christmas is the iambic canon by St. John of Damascus, and both of these two canons serve as a meditation on the paradoxical nature of the dual natures of Christ, how he is first ex uranon, from heaven, the heavenly man, and we should go to meet him, but he is also on the earth as fully man, fully God and fully man. Let us exalt him. And this meditation is a call to lift our minds and hearts and our behavior to heaven, to experience in ourselves the miracle of Christ's birth. Indeed, the great masters of prayer, like St. Maximus the Confessor, in the Philokalia, write about how the divine Logos, who once for all was born in the flesh, always in his compassion desires to be born in spirit in those who desire him. He becomes an infant and molds himself in them through the virtues. He reveals as much of himself as he knows the recipient can accept. He does not diminish the manifestation of his own greatness out of a lack of generosity, but estimates the receptive capacity of those who desire to see him. This from his texts on theology, economy, and the Lord's incarnation. And in his text on the Lord's Prayer, St. Maximus further comments, in souls, that is to say, with balanced dispositions, free from the passions through repentance, Christ always desires to be born in a mystical way, becoming incarnate in those who attain salvation, and making the soul that gives birth to him a virgin mother. For such a soul, to put it briefly, is not conditioned by categories like those of male and female that typify a nature subject to generation and corruption. So the hymnography of Christmas transfigures our mind and heart so that we can pursue the life of virtue that makes our heart a manger, makes our soul a virgin mother, so that Christ can be born in us and grow through the practice of the virtues. Let us have our first musical interlude in which we listen to an excerpt of the canon of the Feast of the Nativity, the Feast of the Lord's Incarnation.
Δόξα σοι ο Θεός ημών, δόξα
We continue with our examples of homilies, the fathers, making it almost verbatim into our liturgical life with a couple of the hymns from the celebration of Saint Nicholas of Myra on December 6th. We have the Doxastikon of the Aposticha, which reads, «Άνθρωπε του Θεού και πιστέ θεράπων, λειτουργέ Κυρίου άνερ επιθυμιών, σκεύος εκλογής στήλε και εδραίωμα της Εκκλησίας, βασιλείας κληρονόμε μη παρασιωπήσεις του βοάν υπερημών των Κύριων». In English, O man of God and loyal servant and minister of the Lord, man of holy desires, chosen vessel, pillar and foundation of the Church of Christ, and inheritor of the kingdom, be not silent in calling out to the Lord on our behalf. We compare this with St. Andrew of Crete's encomium to St. Nicholas of Myra, and in the English translation, it is perhaps slightly obscured, but we can see the similarity. O man of God, faithful servant and steward of Christ's mysteries, and man desiring the things of the Spirit, receive the sermon we deliver to you as a gift, and consider it our gratitude in return for the grace, for the miraculous and ardent help you have shown toward us. But in the original Greek, these several phrases, «Άνθρωπε του Θεού, πιστέ θεράπων, άνερ επιθυμιών, σκεύος εκλογής, στήλε και εδραίωμα», are all lifted verbatim from this first paragraph of this homily. And of course, the message, the doctrine, the not so bitter medicine, but certainly a medicine that calls us to action, is the praise of a saint is in imitation or in appreciation for a life that we are meant to then try to imitate. St. Nicholas, of course, the quintessential hierarch, we have nothing that he wrote that survived. But what we do have is the example of his stories, of the love that he had for his flock to sacrifice the treasures that he was in charge of simply because he could not bear to see a poor man sell his daughters into prostitution. Now, all the other grace that has shown, the God's grace that is shown through the person of St. Nicholas to all those who in faith call on him to intercede. This man of God, the loyal servant and minister of the Lord, is also called the man of desires, aner epithemion. The subtext here is the man desiring the things of the Spirit, or the man of holy desires. And all of these epithets are inseparable from one another. We must be men and women of holy desires in order to be people of God. And so we extol St. Nicholas and in the same breath call upon his memory, the memory of his life that we have as an institutional, experiential memory in the Church, to be more like this holy servant of God. Let us listen to another musical interlude. This time it is the Aposticha Doxastikon of St. Nicholas, as we just said, chanted by the fathers of the Doxiariou Monastery of Mount Athos. last major section tonight, we will return to hymnography that describes the incarnation, both from the period preparing us for the Nativity and from the dogmatic Theotokia written by St. John of Damascus. One of the doctrines of the Church that has been handed down in the tradition is that the birth of Christ was without pain. The Theotokos, not having been a part of a natural birth, was not subject to what St. Maximus the Confessor terms the pleasure and pain dynamic. Briefly, this is our understanding of the fact that since the Virgin Mary did not participate in the normal method of conceiving a child, which involves the highest human pleasure, then she was also not subject to the pain that had been attached at the fall of mankind to a lower form of pleasure than pure communion with God. There's nothing wrong, of course, with the marital act, but it is the choosing of this pleasure that locks us into an earthly way of being, involving pain as a corrective to seeking too much pleasure, and pleasure as a method to numb the pain that we create for ourselves. The Theotokos, having been selected as the Virgin Mother of God, was not subject to the pleasure and pain dynamic, and therefore the product of this virgin birth, namely Christ, could then, in his person, finally settle the debt of humankind on the ontological level, not a legalistic type of debt, but a debt that was written into the fabric of reality, a defect, so to speak, in how reality functioned before Christ came to heal that pleasure and pain dynamic. And so in the canon of the Sunday before Christmas by St. Clement the hymnographer, we hear «Είδες την ημών οδύνην και κάκουσιν ικτήρμον Χριστέ, και ου παρείδες ημάς, αλλά εκένωσας σε αυτόν μη εξτάς του γεννήτωρος, και εσκήνωσας εις μήτραν απειρόγαμον, ή της ανωδύνος τέξεστε, σε σαρκή εν σπηλαίο προέρχεται». In English, «Beholding our pain and affliction, O compassionate Christ, you did not abandon us, but have emptied yourself without leaving your Father, taking your abode in a womb which knew no wedlock. She comes forth to bear you incarnate without travail in a cave». Travail being a semi-archaic word for the pangs of birth. This is also reflected, this exact word, anodinos, is the word that St. John of Damascus uses in his exact exposition of the Orthodox faith, Book 4, Chapter 14, in speaking about the virgin birth and the pleasure-pain dynamic. «Ότι δε ανωδύνος υπερθεσμόν γεννήσεως, εις γαρ ειδονή ου προηγήσετο, ουδέ οδύν επικολούθησε». In that the birth was painless because it was above the laws of generation. For as pleasure did not precede it, pain did not follow it. We see how clearly St. Clement the hymnographer is conversant with this tradition, and even, it seems like, the exact verbiage of the fathers, including St. John of Damascus, who express the dogmatic content of this part of the incarnation in prose using this word, that word makes it into the poetry of the church. Sadly, there's no good recording that I could find, as it's quite rare for most churches to do up to the 6th ode of the canon on any given Sunday, and also record it. But this same doctrine is recorded also in the dogmatic Theotokion of the Plagal of the second mode, again by St. John of Damascus. Τις μη μακαρίσισε, Παναγία Παρθένε, τις μη ανυμνήσει σου των αλόχευτων τόκων, ο γαραχρόνος εκ πατρός εκ λάμψας Υιός μονογενής, ο αυτός εξού της αγνής προήλθεν αφράστος σαρκωθής, φύση Θεός υπάρχον και φύση γενόμενος άνθρωπος διημάς, ουκ εις διάδα προσώπων τεμνόμενος αλ εν διάδη φύσεων ασυγχύτως γνωριζόμενος. Αυτόν οικέτευε σε μη παμακάριστε ελεηθήνε τας ψυχάς ημών. I'll point out the word that I used, that I emphasized, τις μη ανυμνήσεις σου των αλόχευτων τόκων. Αλόχευτον means something very similar to an odinon, but odini is a kind of general type of travail or pain, whereas lohia is birth pangs specifically. And so this would be translated, who would not hymn your birth giving without birth pangs? That is to say, your birth giving that was without birth pangs. This directly reflects the verbiage of the 79th canon of the Quinisext Ecumenical Council, the Penthecti. Αλόχευτον των εκ της Παρθένου θείων τόκων ομολογούντες. We confess the Theotokos' divine birth-giving as without birth pangs. Let us hear this hymn chanted by the duo of Nikos Dimitriou and Panayotis Neochoritis. Panayotis Neochoritis is, as we may know, currently the Archon Protopsaltis, the Archon first chanter of the Great Church of Christ, the Patriarchate in Constantinople. return back to a little explanation for the preface of our last piece, which is the dogmatic Theotokion in the Plagal fourth mode. In this dogmatic Theotokion, we, among other things, hear St. John of Damascus saying, «Dio τέλειον αυτόν Θεόν και τέλειον άνθρωπον αληθώς κηρύττοντες ομολογούμεν Χριστόν τον Θεόν ημών». Therefore we truly proclaim and confess that he is perfect God and perfect man. This, of course, is the tension that we live in the reality of the incarnation, that we are also called, as Christ tells us, to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. We recognize that we are not τέλειοι άνθρωποι. There is one τέλειος anthropos, Christ, and so it is through him that we must ascend to this perfection that he calls us to. This phrase, τέλειον αυτόν Θεόν και τέλειον άνθρωπον, is in the oros, the decision of the Seventh Ecumenical Council verbatim. But instead of using the word homologumen at the end of that phrase, the fathers of the Seventh Ecumenical Council instead say τέλειον αυτόν Θεόν και τέλειον άνθρωπον γινώσκοντες. We know him to be perfect God and perfect man. So let us close out this episode of the podcast with a rendition of the composition of this dogmatic Theotokion of the Plagal of the fourth mode by Daniel Protopsaltis, the composition by Daniel Protopsaltis, and the rendition by Georgios Lemonopoulos. I pray that we all have a blessed nativity and that we deepen our engagement and with the hymnography, the hymnology of the Church, so that we can also prepare the manger of our hearts to receive the most divine Christ child and to ascend to being the Father's sons by adoption. I pray that we all had a blessed Christmas and that we may encounter the Feast of the Theophany with the same deepening appreciation and experience of the hymnology of the Church. Amen.